Black individuals are more likely to experience police stops, searches, and force than white individuals, even when accounting for crime rates. This does not mean that every officer is personally biased, but it does indicate a pattern affected by broader systemic biases that merit attention. All right, everyone. So we wanted to address some comments in our previous episode that were not necessarily controversial, but just felt like addressing them. Not really sure who this individual is, but here is what he said. Mr. Phil with Cheese said, African Americans don't commit the most crimes. They also don't have the majority of criminals in prison. Whites do. That being said, African American culture does not promote crime. You can't dispute the numbers. Police aren't racist. They just do their job regardless of who the criminal is. Also, Black people did not build the country. During slavery, they peaked at 8 to 10% of the population. The other 90+% were not doing nothing. So I think, I'm not really sure who this individual is. Appreciate the comment though and the engagement, and just felt like I would like to address it and we can have a conversation. So let's begin with crime and incarceration rates.
Why are we getting so heavy? But we got to do it. Y'all want it, we're going to give it to you.
Crime data shows that while African Americans represent a disproportionate percentage of those incarcerated compared to their population share, this is a complex issue shaped by multiple socioeconomic factors, historical disparities, and systematic issues. A 2021 report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics show that Black Americans make up about 33% of the U.S. prison population, though they comprise only of 13% of the overall population. Meanwhile, white Americans make up approximately 30% of the incarcerated population, while comprising of 60% of the general population. So while African Americans are not the majority of prisoners, they are disproportionately represented. So, Mr. Phil with Cheese.
First of all, great name. Hey, great name.
First of all, African Americans do have a higher percentage of those in prisons compared to their white counterparts, even though African Americans only represent 13% of the population, while white Americans make up 60% of the population. And going back to what I said in the previous video, Black people do not commit the most crimes in America. White people do, which you agreed with. So that being said, the data actually does not support your view, sir. Sorry, but the data just does not agree. We're not going to go into happenstance because a lot of people tried to check me on my data in the last video. So I am just going to give facts, not fiction, not feelings, but facts. There is a high percentage of African Americans in prison, even though they don't do most crimes and not a majority of the population. So there's obviously an issue there that must be dealt with.
And then you could go into the sentencing disparity for the same crime from that. Bro, that's a big, I'm trying not to get turned up on this early morning. I'm trying.
So that's that. We're not going to go much deeper into that, but it's obvious that there is a huge issue that that needs to be addressed. I mean, we're not going to go into it, but it's obvious that it's there. But let's move on, right? Because there was other things. He defended the policing and racial bias. He said police don't target black people, they just, do their job, whoever's doing the crime. And he talked about African American culture promoting crime. That's a whole nother discussion, because exactly what do you mean by African American culture? There's a lot of things in African American culture. Beyond all of that, I'm not even sure if you're African American. You can let me know in the comments, but let's go into policing and racial bias. A number of studies have shown racial disparities do exist in law enforcement practices. For instance, a study from the proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences found black individuals are more likely to experience police stops, searches, and force than white individuals, even when accounting for crime rates. This does not mean that every officer is personally biased, but it does indicate a pattern affected by broader systemic biases that merit attention. It's just a fact. Like, they studied this, that a black man is more likely to get pulled over than a white man. It's a fact. It's not feelings. It's not, oh, we're making it up. It's a fact. It's true. I don't know how else to say it, but that's just the reality. Like, they tested this out. They would test out the amount of people that would get pulled over or get stopped or get searched when you're talking white versus black, and it's disproportionate. It's just the reality. What are your thoughts?
We could go into so many ways and so many things, from over policing being part of why. If I have 10 supervisors monitoring a call center to see who is actually making their calls, who's messing around on their computer or their phone, and then I have another call center, same size, but I only have 4 supervisors looking over their shoulders. Don't you think you're going to find more messing up when you have 10 supervisors in that same space looking over the same amount of people? So that's where over policing comes in at. Then you go from, okay, now you're catching more people because you're putting more feet on the ground, but that's really not solving the problem, because the other call center room may have the same, if not more, people that are distracted and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But you're not catching it because you're over policing one room instead of the other. Then we could go into how policing was formed, and how we could talk about the 13th Amendment, and how, the loss of your freedom basically re-enslaves you. There's so much that we could talk about and so much that we could say. And don't let me bring my wife into this pod, bro. She would go hammer. Like, please.
Yeah. Again, I really want to bring facts to this conversation, because people get into these comments and they feel like, oh, they're just coming with the more reasonable, the more factual perspective. Mm-hmm. And then people who, they try to label you like you're just constantly complaining and all of these different things. But then he goes even deeper, where he wants to talk about enslaved Africans. The unmitigated gall of talking about how slaves did not build the country, which, okay, let's just consider this. The labor of enslaved black Americans played an undeniable role in building the American economy, especially in the 18th and the 19th centuries. Their work on plantation, producing cotton, tobacco, and other goods was foundational to the wealth of the Southern economy, and also contributed heavily to the national economy. According to historians like Edward E. Baptist, the author of The Half Has Never Been Told, the labor of enslaved Africans significantly shaped early American capitalism and industry, which benefited both northern and southern states. I mean, just think about it. We both have businesses.
Yeah.
If I'm able to run my business for 400 years and never have to pay my employees, how significant would my business grow? if you're not the most wealthy country on the planet, something's wrong. Because the major things that you were able to develop during that time set the foundation for allowing you to be not only the most wealthiest economy, but also the largest military, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that time period of being able to basically finesse an entire population of people into doing your work for you, or at least scaling the amount of work you're able to do and produce much higher and much faster than you ever would have been able to do had you not done that. Yeah, those people did build your country. Like, you can say, well, they only made up 8 to 10% of the population. That wasn't even what I was talking about. When I say they built the country, they set the foundation for one of the greatest economies in world history. One of the strongest, healthiest economies in world history. Now, how does a country that is relatively young compared to other countries get one of the largest economies in world history without some type of finesse? It doesn't happen. And that's the point. This group of people that did not come here, African Americans are not immigrants. They did not choose to come here. It got chosen for them. And I mean, you can go into how, people in Africa were a part of it too, and all of the different things. All of that is whatever. There was something very unique and sinister around the African slave trade that I don't think it's so uncomfortable to discuss because of the level of guilt that some people feel around it. And usually that brings about defensiveness, and I don't want to believe that this great place that I call home was really a torture chamber for a large group of people. And I can empathize with that sentiment. Everyone wants to believe the best about whatever they're a part of. But the reality is there's always somebody else's perspective. There should be a reckoning, a group of people that played such a major part in building this country. And to be honest, I don't think there will ever be any real peace in the country until that happens. Like, you have to reconcile, and the more that you put it off, the higher the bill becomes. You can act like it didn't happen, but I mean, if I owe something, I can act like it doesn't exist, but it's going to keep growing and growing and growing until I address it.
Hashtag student loans. Oh, man. Okay. I ain't got nothing to add to that, bro.
All right. And then I want to lastly just kind of briefly talk about the population dynamics during slavery. So the percentage of African Americans during the era of slavery varied, with enslaved individuals making up around 13% of the population by 1860. While Black people didn't constitute the majority of the population, their forced labor had a massive economic impact, especially given that their contributions were not compensated and in many cases replaced the need for paid labor. So that's just an added point, but it doesn't really matter. That's really the reality of the situation. So all of that being said, you cannot come into this conversation thinking that you're going to be able to bring. You can't override the overwhelming data that exists in this argument or this conversation. It just
you know what the alpha generation would say. He thought he ate. And Phil with the cheese, man. Hey, y'all said respectfully, but you got it. We're coming with the data. We're coming with the research.
And I understand that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's a lot of African Americans are commenting this as well in the comments. And I kind of get it. A part of me is just like, really? I don't understand that. I don't know where that comes from. This need of, I don't want to say too much because I might slip up and say something that I'm not supposed to, or I might get my Umar Johnson on a little bit. And I don't want to. But it's funny too, because I'm mixed, right? I have these conversations with my mom all the time. So, and my mom is white, and she just kind of like, she just has that. But I'm just like, yo, what? Like, I don't understand. I'm gonna say something, and you could comment. You let me know what you think. Among some African Americans, do you feel like there is a subconscious need to impress or be accepted by white people?
Well, I mean, I think the desire to be accepted is from everybody, but I would say the overwhelming culture has what is customary white or Anglo things higher up, like everything from hair texture, pigment to, all these things. I just saw a video on how black dolls are more expensive by like 10%.
Really?
Yeah, 10 to 12% more expensive. There's definitely that desire to fit in and to be in that culture. And then another thing that I feel like is not cool is that certain things are ascribed to being white, which are not. They're just not. Being well-spoken is not white. Being educated is not white. Being well-mannered is not white. Like some of these things that people just associate with the majority as their thing is not. And there's some people that are trying to distance themselves from certain things that the majority has said that these things are Hispanic stuff or black stuff. Like, so if you hear loud music in a neighborhood, you're thinking, this is that culture. If you see a lot of people outside and garage doors open when you drive a neighborhood, you're thinking this type of culture, right? Yes, and it was a long way for me to say this, but yes, but it's something that's in all of us, and if we're not conscious of it,
it's a part of our society that we live in, right? Like, What do they call it when you act a certain way around your people?
Code switching.
Yeah, like I had to learn how to do that, like from just jumping from one family reunion to the other.
So one you were line dancing and the other one you were surfing.
It's just one of those things, and you
go from swag surfing to line dancing.
It's kind of fascinating, right? Like just this whole conversation. But I think overall, and I know our people are like, well, you're going into politics, you're going into these different things. I think there's a deeper thing that really has to be suggested and why all of this matters. Our podcast is called Level Up, where we talk about like just leveling up in life and business and all these different things. And specifically when it comes to like just black people in general, I think that it's so important that beyond, what our demand to the culture or to the country or whatever, like I feel like there has to be like this self-love kind of reintroduced, where you don't feel like you have to ascribe to another culture or to another people or be accepted by that, because that's a burden, man. Like that's a real burden that you feel subconsciously that's not healthy. You know what I mean? Like you should be. And it's difficult too, and this whole conversation is difficult because like you should be proud of your culture, but what's difficult and unique about the African American experience is we were ripped from our culture. So like if you look at other immigrants from Ireland or from Japan or from any of these other places, They come here, but they're still connected to where they're from. It just pops off in America and everything goes crazy. They go home. Most of the time, they're just here for the bag. And as soon as they get the bag, they're out. But it's different when you never fully had a connection to where you're from. And even the things that you were told about where you're from was always in a negative light. You weren't taught that so much of the sciences and the brilliance came out of Egypt, and just so much of what we experience now had its genesis in Africa, and all of these different things. So I just think it's unfortunate, and it's just like wild the amount of things that you have to overcome when that is what you're born into. You know what I mean?
I feel you, bro. But one thing you gotta touch on is when he talked about black culture promotes violence. Let me go off on this, and then you can finish off. Okay, if you remember early rap had nothing to do with violence. Mm-mm. If you remember early hip hop, which I'm an '80s baby. If you remember early hip hop, had nothing to do.
It was consciousness.
So what happened is that hip hop became a commodity, and it became something that was controlled by money. When you have money, then you could control what artists get the contracts, and then they actually go to the radio stations to promote songs and pay for spins on the radio stations. So these individuals were creating a culture that rewarded that violent talk and that drill music that you hear now. So was violence always a thing? Yes, but it was not part of hip hop. It was not the main part of hip hop. It wasn't what was getting the love. Like, if you think about how big and popular Will Smith was when he was a rapper, like, nobody could mistakenly say that Will was a gangster rapper. So I say all that to say, it's not the culture that's promoting violence. It is the executives that are feeding the people violence, which is then making it seem like the culture is violent. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? It's like reverse engineering. Like, if I brainwash you enough, if I feed you enough propaganda, you'll begin to believe what I'm telling you is gospel.
Negativity always sells more than positivity.
Oh, have you noticed a new trend? I know you're in marketing. Have you noticed a new trend in ads now that they'll be like, don't do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
And then like, don't subscribe to this podcast.
Yeah.
Because when I subscribed to the podcast, I got some information and some laughter that I wasn't expecting.
Bro, you brought up something, and I kind of want to touch on it for a little. You set a good foundation there. When it comes to violence, like, okay, you want to talk about violence.
I already know where you're going, bro. No!
You want to talk about violence, right? And how violent the black community is, and how, and you mentioned music, the same with movies, all the stuff, entertainment in general. Okay. I mean, anything that you see that's really negative in the black community, but let's talk about violence. It's so hilarious how anybody that lives in the country that has more guns than people, wants to say that African Americans promote violence. This country is the most violent country in the world. What other country do you know where every time you step out of the door, you might get shot? That's just a fact. You have guns everywhere.
Hey, I'm pro Second Amendment.
Me too. I'm not even against
Hey, heat
it.
up.
Why would I not? Why? I mean, I live here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm not anti Second Amendment. Like, if I'm not strapped, I don't know what. Anything could pop off. Like, you have to be able to defend your family some way. But I'm just saying, though, living in this country, how in the world can you then go to a community that one? I mean, even if you want to look at the violence and crime rate, we talked about crime at the beginning of this, right? Crime is always tied to poverty. Always. Crime and poverty are bedfellows. They go together like peanut butter and jelly. Wherever there is a high level of poverty, there is a high level of crime. That's just reality. So, you go to a place that you want to talk about redlining and how detrimental that was to the black community. And all of the stuff, like, it goes on and on, the level of systemic oppression that happens to a people. And again, like, come at me with some more nonsense in the comments and I'll do a video again, because this is just, it's wild that you can turn around and call this, oh, you're making it this. There's no excuse. It's not like an excuse. It's just the reality of the situation. You have people who are on food stamps, on all of these different things, trying to survive. Ultimately, if you see someone selling drugs or doing anything like that, because gangs are about selling drugs. The reason why gangs form is so that way they can distribute narcotics. But then you got to ask yourself, where did those drugs come from? And how did they enter into the black community? Black people don't have ships, don't have planes. How are they getting the drugs? And then the guns. How are they getting the guns? Where are the guns coming from? Since we're so violent. And even with the violence, you mentioned it before, hip hop, the genesis of hip hop was not one of violence, but that of consciousness. That was where people came to get knowledge about how knowledge that was stolen from them, right? Trying to re-empower self-love, which is so critical to being successful in life. If you don't love yourself, if you don't have pride, and I don't say it in a pride goes before destruction way. I'm just saying pride as in you are proud of who you are, your heritage, that you have a level of dignity and self-respect. But it's so crazy because the psychological issue where black people don't even trust themselves. Black people don't even like black people. And there's this constant war. And a lot of that has to do with the images and the music that they see. But again, who promotes the music? You mention it. How many black record owners are there? Not many. How many people people who produce these movies, how many of them are black? Not many. And if you look at the few who are, usually they're just telling stories about what they experience. Not necessarily saying that it's right, but it's what they experience because it's where they're from.
I could go on, and I'm not going to take credit for this, but I forgot where I read it. It essentially said that we learned violence and true brutality at the hands of the master of the plantation.
Yeah.
Like, where you would separate families, you would beat, hang slaves who broke rules. You would cut off fingers, arms. You would maim individuals and take their kids, molest their kids, like, and then still force them to smile in your face. If not, then you're gonna either get killed or get sold away from your family. Like, man, I wish I could remember the author and give them credit, but yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot,
I mean,
and
to
I
that
take
point, bro.
accountability because I think we should take accountability because we could have said no to the
Yeah.
bag, but saying no to the bag means that you are okay with staying in your current condition. Then I can help those that are around me. But you getting out and putting this poison back into the well is hurting more people than
Yeah.
you're able to help with the amount of percentage of wealth that you're getting from this person. Like if you're making
You
a
should
million, they're making 10 million.
you should empathize though, even with the artists. Like, think about it. You get in most music deals are so just they're so terrible. They are terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, just the level of exploitation that happens to artists is just it should be criminal, to be honest. Like, it's absolutely detrimental. And they have to, once they sign that contract, they basically have to abide by the rules. But here's what I think we ought to empathize with. You mentioned, and we're not going to keep going because obviously this could be so long, but like you mentioned, the violence of the master, the plantation master. What's the motivation behind that behind that violence? Control, manipulation, brutalization, and profiting off of the exploitation of the people that you don't even consider as humans. You don't even consider them as your equal. You consider them as labor and as material for your own benefit and your own well-being. But then look at the violence of the slave or the person who's disenfranchised. It's survival. It's just trying to survive. It's trying to figure out a way of maybe possibly providing a better life for your family or the people that you love. Trying your best in the most unfavorable circumstances. You can't look at that. Those are not the same thing. They're not. So, Mr. Black culture, it promotes violence. My question to you is, where did we learn it from?
I think we end on that, bro.
To the rest of our audience, love yourself. That's where it starts, bro. Honestly. Like, you cannot, I mean, regardless of the culture you come from, you have to start and say, you know what, regardless of anything, like, I'm worth something. And with that foundation, leveling up is inevitable. That's my thoughts. Peace.